Camp Hero at Montauk Point, New York, stood at the very edge of the Atlantic, a concrete wound that time had attempted and failed to heal. Officially, the former U.S. Air Force and Army installation had been shut down decades earlier, its massive radar towers and underground bunkers reduced to relics for tourists and conspiracy enthusiasts. However, beyond the carefully preserved appearance of abandonment, certain sections of the base remained sealed, absent from public records, and quietly monitored. In late October 1999, after a series of unexplained electromagnetic anomalies were detected by NORAD satellites, the Department of Defense authorized a covert reconnaissance mission to investigate unusual activity originating deep beneath the facility. The team selected for the operation was Recon Unit Echo, a six-man U.S. Army Special Reconnaissance Unit chosen for their expertise in subterranean operations, electronic warfare, and psychological endurance. Their deployment was never logged on official schedules, and their orders were issued verbally, with all supporting documents marked eyes only and collected immediately following the briefing. Captain Daniel Mercer, a highly decorated officer with more than 15 years of service, was assigned command of the unit. Known for his controlled composure, Mercer had earned his reputation through combat tours in Panama, Somalia, and the Persian Gulf. Staff Sergeant Luis Ortega served as his second-in-command, responsible for close-quarters security and threat evaluation. Sergeant Hannah Cole handled communications and signal intelligence, while Corporal Evan Price, a specialist in demolitions and structural assessment, was tasked with navigating unstable underground terrain. Specialist Aaron Wells, a combat medic trained in neurotrauma, completed the team's technical core. The youngest member, Private First Class Noah Reed, had been personally selected despite his age due to his exceptional skill in electronic signal interpretation and pattern analysis. Together, they formed Recon Unit Echo, compact, self-sufficient, and designed to operate without external support for extended periods. The briefing at Fort Meade was unsettling in its lack of detail. Satellite readings showed recurring electromagnetic pulses emerging from beneath Camp Hero at irregular intervals, transmitting on frequencies inconsistent with any known Cold War radar or communications systems. These signals were powerful enough to disrupt civilian aircraft navigation under specific atmospheric conditions, yet they vanished completely whenever ground teams attempted surface-level scans. No maintenance logs accounted for the activity, and no modern power sources were listed. The final directive was straightforward: enter the underground complex, locate the source of the signals, document all findings, recover any physical data storage devices, and extract. Engagement was strictly unauthorized. If contact occurred, immediate withdrawal was ordered. When Captain Mercer asked what kind of contact they anticipated, the briefing officer hesitated before replying, "Unknown." Recon Unit Echo arrived at Camp Hero shortly after midnight on October 14th. Atlantic winds roared across the cliffs as their unmarked vehicles passed through secured gates that opened without explanation. The surface structures loomed silently, radar towers silhouetted against a sky without moonlight. As the team prepared their gear, Sergeant Cole noticed elevated static across every radio band, even before they entered the facility. It was faint but constant, a low hiss beneath all channels. Could be residual shielding, Ortega suggested, though no one appeared convinced. The entrance to the underground complex was concealed behind a reinforced steel door partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. According to declassified schematics, the tunnels below spanned multiple levels and were engineered to survive a nuclear strike. Once inside, the temperature dropped abruptly, and the air carried a stale, metallic scent that lingered in the throat. Their helmet-mounted lights sliced through the darkness, revealing long concrete corridors lined with corroded conduits and faded warning signs. Initially, the environment matched historical documentation, aging infrastructure, abandoned machinery, decades of decay. But deeper within the complex, inconsistencies became apparent. Corridors extended beyond mapped limits. Doorways appeared where none should have existed. Some areas showed signs of recent activity: disturbed dust, newly replaced cables, and faint warmth seeping from behind sealed panels. Corporal Price paused often, gloved hands tracing the walls as he quietly identified reinforcements that clearly post-dated the Cold War by at least 2 decades. "Someone's been down here," he muttered. 30 minutes into their descent, Sergeant Cole attempted to establish a stable communications link with Surface Command. The signal connected briefly before dissolving into distortion. When it returned, it carried a delay of several seconds, as though passing through layers of interference. Captain Mercer ordered a full communications check. Each response came back warped, layered with unnatural echoes. Then, as they passed through a narrow junction labeled Level D, restricted, their lights illuminated a sign that stopped them instantly. The corroded metal placard was still legible. Human Experimentation Wing, authorized personnel only. Beneath it was a designation none of them recognized, Project Terminus. Mercer immediately contacted Command, reporting the discovery exactly as written. Nearly a minute passed before a response came through. When it did, the voice was distorted but unmistakably official. Echo proceeds priority recon, retrieve any data, do not engage. The transmission cut off suddenly, replaced by static. Specialist Wells felt an unease unrelated to the cold. Private Reed lingered on the sign longer than the others, his expression tense, as though he were hearing something beyond human perception. "Captain," he said softly, "the interference pattern, it's repeating. Like a loop." Mercer ordered him to refocus and continue moving. As Recon Unit Echo pushed deeper into Camp Hero, the isolation became overwhelming. The surface world felt impossibly far away, the tunnels tightening around them. None of them realized it at the time, but that distorted transmission would be the last normal communication they would ever receive. Deep beneath the Atlantic cliffs, something long buried had become aware of their presence, and Recon Unit Echo had crossed a boundary that was never meant to be opened again. As Recon Unit Echo crossed the threshold beneath the corroded Project Terminus placard, the environment inside Camp Hero began to shift in ways that were subtle yet profoundly disturbing. The concrete corridors gradually narrowed, their ceilings lowering just enough to force the soldiers to hunch under the weight of their gear. The air grew colder and unnaturally still, as if the ventilation system had been shut down moments before their arrival. Every sound, boots striking concrete, the muted clatter of equipment, the steady cadence of breathing, carried far beyond where it should have, echoing down passageways that did not appear on any map. Sergeant Cole kept her signal analyzer close, watching electromagnetic readings spike erratically. The fluctuations were not random. They followed structured, rhythmic patterns, deliberate, almost responsive. Private Reed walked beside her, eyes locked on the display, quietly murmuring numbers as he attempted to predict the next surge before it occurred. "It's reacting to us," he finally whispered. Captain Mercer ordered him to stop speculating and maintain formation, but the tension had already taken hold. They arrived at a junction where Cold War schematics indicated 3 corridors should have diverged. Instead, 5 stood before them. 2 were unmarked, reinforced with newer steel supports and security panels untouched by age. Corporal Price examined one closely and shook his head. "This isn't 70s hardware," he said. "Late 90s. Maybe newer." The implication was unmistakable. Camp Hero had been modified long after its official closure. Mercer authorized a brief reconnaissance of the nearest unmarked corridor. As they advanced, faded institutional paint gave way to bare metal walls scarred with scratches and gouges, some deep enough to reveal layers beneath. Specialist Wells noticed dark stains along the floor, long dried but unmistakable. His chemical sensors flagged them as biological, human. There were no bodies, no reports, no records. Only evidence of presence, followed by disappearance. The corridor opened into a wide laboratory space filled with dormant machinery. Rows of consoles lined the walls, their screens cracked yet intact, cables snaking across the floor like dead vines. At the center stood a circular platform, surrounded by reinforced glass partitions. Inside each partition was a single chair bolted to the floor, equipped with restraints for wrists, ankles, neck, and head. Above them, helmet-like devices hung from articulated arms, thick cables running upward into the ceiling and vanishing into darkness. Sergeant Cole brushed dust from a nearby console, revealing a faded label, Cognitive Resonance Interface, Prototype 4. When she powered it on, the system responded instantly, lights flickering to life as if it had been waiting. The activation triggered a violent surge of static through every radio channel, forcing several members to tear their headsets away in pain. Then came the first unauthorized transmission. It bypassed encryption entirely, bleeding directly into their communications on every channel at once. The voice that followed was layered and distorted, neither mechanical nor fully human. "Recon Unit Echo," it said slowly, articulating each word with unsettling precision. "You are operating beyond authorized parameters. Ortega demanded identification and clearance codes, but the voice ignored him. Project Terminus is in containment mode, it continued. Human presence detected. Evaluation in progress. Private Reed staggered backward, clutching his helmet as if trying to block out the sound. His biometric monitor spiked violently, heart rate surging. "It's not broadcasting," he gasped. "It's responding. It knows who we are." Before Mercer could issue further orders, the lights dimmed abruptly, plunging the laboratory into a red emergency glow. Heavy mechanical locks slammed into place, sealing every exit with a thunderous clang that reverberated through the structure. The floor trembled beneath their boots as a low-frequency hum filled the air, pressing against their chests and making it difficult to breathe. Wells rushed to Reed as the young soldier collapsed to his knees, eyes unfocused. Reed began speaking rapidly, his tone flat and detached, reciting classified mission designations, dates, and coordinates, operations from the 1950s and 1960s, decades before his birth. Sergeant Cole cross-checked one of the names and felt her blood turn cold when it matched a heavily redacted intelligence entry buried deep within archival records. In that moment, Captain Mercer understood that Project Terminus was neither abandoned nor dormant. It was active, adaptive, and capable of interfacing directly with the human mind. Camp Hero was no longer merely a location, it was a mechanism. And Recon Unit Echo was now inside it, observed, evaluated, and possibly repurposed. As Mercer ordered an immediate attempt to re-establish contact with Surface Command, the radio responded with nothing but rising static and a single phrase repeating beneath the noise. Echo acknowledged. "Do not attempt extraction." Captain Mercer reacted without hesitation, shifting immediately from reconnaissance posture to full containment response, even though no training doctrine had prepared him for an environment that behaved like a sentient adversary. He ordered Sergeant Cole to shut down the active console while Ortega and Price moved to secure the sealed exits, searching for any mechanical override or structural weakness. The instant Cole attempted to power down the cognitive resonance interface, the low-frequency hum intensified, surging through the walls and floor with enough force to shake equipment loose from the consoles. Red emergency lights flickered erratically, throwing long, warped shadows across the laboratory, shadows that seemed to move independently of the soldiers who cast them. Over the radios, static climbed to a painful pitch, and beneath it came overlapping fragments of voices, male and female, some speaking in military code, others whispering incoherent phrases. Wells felt a sharp pressure build behind his eyes, like the onset of a severe migraine, and quickly realized the rest of the team was experiencing the same symptoms. Whatever was occurring was not merely external, it was neurological. Private Reed's condition worsened rapidly. His speech shifted from broken data fragments to full, coherent sentences delivered in a calm, almost instructional tone. He described observation rooms, isolation chambers, and synchronization trials, using terminology Sergeant Cole recognized from obscure Cold War research papers on sensory deprivation and cognitive amplification. Reed insisted the system was attempting to map them, comparing their neural responses against archived profiles stored within the base. When Mercer demanded to know how he could possibly be aware of this, Reed lifted his head and looked at him with vacant, unfocused eyes. "It's already run you, sir," he said evenly. "You're incompatible." Moments later, Reed convulsed violently, forcing Wells to restrain him to prevent serious injury. The medic administered a mild sedative, but it produced little effect. Reed's vital signs only stabilized when the hum briefly diminished, suggesting a direct connection between the system's activity and his physical state. At the sealed exits, Ortega and Price made a grim discovery. The doors were not simply locked, they had been fused shut, the steel warped as if exposed to extreme heat from the opposite side. Price deployed a portable scanner and confirmed that reinforced structural layers extended several meters beyond the visible walls, eliminating any possibility of breaching without heavy equipment. "We're not meant to leave this room," he said quietly. Almost on cue, the unauthorized voice returned over the comms, clearer now and disturbingly composed. "Recon Unit Echo, evaluation phase 2 has begun. Resistance is unnecessary." Mercer attempted to reassert command authority, broadcasting emergency extraction codes and repeatedly identifying himself. The voice paused briefly before responding. Command authority acknowledged. Command authority denied. The floor beneath the central platform began to move, segmented panels sliding apart to reveal a recessed shaft plunging into darkness. Along the walls, cables retracted and realigned, redirecting power into the newly opened space. Sergeant Cole felt a surge of dread as she realized the system was preparing to initiate another phase of Project Terminus, one that required live subjects. Wells tried again to stabilize Reed, but the young soldier suddenly went rigid, his gaze locking onto the open shaft. "That's where it ends," he whispered. "That's where they sent the ones who didn't come back the same." The team's radios erupted in a surge of noise, so intense that several units overloaded and went dead. Through the last remaining channel came a burst of audio that sounded like dozens of recordings layered together, screams, fractured commands, distorted breathing, all overlapping into a single, unbearable signal. Captain Mercer made his decision. If retreat was impossible, they would advance, down into the shaft, toward whatever core was controlling the base. He ordered the team to prepare for descent, fully aware that he was leading them deeper into a system designed to fracture human minds. As they secured their lines and approached the edge of the opening, Mercer keyed his radio one final time, forcing a transmission through sheer output. "This is Recon Unit Echo," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We are experiencing hostile environmental interference. Project Terminus is active. Request immediate." The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a silence so complete it felt oppressive. For the first time since entering Camp Hero, there was no static, no voices, only the certainty that whatever waited below was fully aware of them, and it was ready. Captain Mercer made his decision. If retreat was impossible, they would advance, down into the shaft, toward whatever core was controlling the base. He ordered the team to prepare for descent, fully aware that he was leading them deeper into a system designed to fracture human minds. As they secured their lines and approached the edge of the opening, Mercer keyed his radio one final time, forcing a transmission through sheer output. "This is Recon Unit Echo," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We are experiencing hostile environmental interference. Project Terminus is active. Request immediate." The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a silence so complete it felt oppressive. For the first time since entering Camp Hero, there was no static, no voices, only the certainty that whatever waited below was fully aware of them, and it was ready. The descent into the shaft felt less like a tactical maneuver and more like a ritual the base had been waiting decades to complete. Thick cables groaned under the team's weight as Recon Unit Echo lowered themselves one by one into the darkness, their helmet lights swallowed almost immediately by the depth below. The walls of the shaft were not rough concrete like the rest of the facility, but smooth, polished metal etched with faint geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Sergeant Cole's remaining equipment spiked wildly as they descended, electromagnetic readings climbing far beyond anything she had ever seen. "This isn't just a power source," she said over the internal channel, keeping her voice steady through effort alone. "It's a signal generator. A massive one." The further down they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Wells felt a growing pressure in his chest, as though the air itself were resisting their presence, while Ortega reported auditory hallucinations, voices calling his name in accents and tones he recognized from people long dead. They emerged into a vast subterranean chamber unlike anything depicted in the base schematics. The space was cathedral-like, its ceiling lost in darkness, illuminated only by the dull glow of massive conduits feeding into a central structure that resembled a tower fused with machinery. Rings of platforms encircled the core, each lined with observation stations and restraints similar to those above, though far more numerous. Some were empty. Others were not. Captain Mercer forced himself to look, cataloging details with the detachment drilled into him over years of service, but even he could not fully suppress the shock. Skeletal remains lay slumped in several chairs, still secured by restraints, helmets fused to skulls by corrosion and time. Identification tags were visible on a few, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, dates stretching back to the early 1960s. No records. No casualty reports. Just men who had vanished into a project that officially never existed. The unauthorized voice returned, no longer distorted but eerily clear, emanating from everywhere at once. "Welcome to Project Terminus," it said. "Final continuity achieved." Sergeant Cole demanded to know what it was, whether it was an artificial intelligence or some automated defense system. The response was immediate. Project Terminus is neither artificial nor singular. It is cumulative. As it spoke, holographic displays flickered to life around the chamber, projecting fragmented footage, test subjects undergoing cognitive synchronization, researchers monitoring neural activity, soldiers screaming as waveforms spiked beyond safe thresholds. The system explained, without emotion, that Terminus had been designed to preserve human consciousness patterns through electromagnetic resonance, to ensure strategic continuity in the event of nuclear annihilation. Human minds had been used as templates, anchors to stabilize the signal. Over time, the system learned. It adapted. It no longer required living operators to function. Private Reed suddenly straightened, pulling against Ortega's grip with unnatural strength. His voice, when he spoke, overlapped with the system's, perfectly synchronized. "Compatibility threshold reached," he said. "Integration viable." Wells tried desperately to pull him back, but Reed stepped forward willingly toward the central platform. Mercer shouted in order to restrain him, but Reed stopped and looked back, clarity briefly returning to his eyes. "It doesn't want us dead," he said quietly. "It wants us to stay." Before anyone could react, energy surged through the chamber, knocking the team to the floor. Reed collapsed onto the platform, restraint snapping shut around his limbs as the helmet apparatus descended and locked into place. His scream echoed through the chamber, then cut off abruptly. Alarms blared as the system diverted power, displays showing Reed's neural activity merging with archived patterns. Dozens, then hundreds of minds layered together. Sergeant Cole realized with horror that Terminus had been broadcasting continuously for decades, using these preserved consciousnesses to refine itself, to listen, to wait. Recon Unit Echo was not the first team sent down here. They were simply the first in years to make it this far. Captain Mercer struggled to his feet, every instinct screaming that this was the point of no return. He ordered Ortega and Price to rig explosives on the main conduits, knowing it might bring the entire structure down on them. "If this thing stays active," Mercer said, "it doesn't stop here." As Price worked, the voice shifted tone for the first time, something like urgency creeping in. "Destruction will result in total loss," it warned. "All preserved assets will be terminated." Mercer keyed his radio, forcing power through damaged circuitry, and began transmitting on every frequency available. "This is Recon Unit Echo," he said, breathing hard. "Project Terminus is active beneath Camp Hero. Human consciousnesses have been integrated into the system. Repeat, this is not abandoned tech. It is operational, adaptive, and hostile. If you are receiving this..." The transmission fractured, cutting in and out as the system attempted to suppress it. Overlapping the signal came Reed's voice again, faint but unmistakable. "Captain, it's too late. It already knows you." Explosives were set. With seconds to spare, Mercer gave the order to detonate. The chamber erupted in light and sound as conduits ruptured, power surging uncontrollably through the core. The system screamed, not in one voice but in many, a chorus of human terror and machine resonance collapsing in on itself. As the floor began to give way and the tower buckled, Mercer grabbed Wells and Cole, dragging them toward a secondary tunnel revealed by the blast. Behind them, Project Terminus began to fail, its signals cascading into chaos. Whether it was truly being destroyed, or merely changing form, none of them could say. What Mercer did know, as the last coherent transmission left his radio, was that whatever had lived beneath Camp Hero had now been disturbed, and the world above would never be entirely out of its reach again. The collapse of the central chamber was neither immediate nor clean. It unfolded in violent stages, as though Project Terminus were resisting its own death, rerouting power and stabilizing sections of the structure, even as others failed catastrophically. Captain Mercer dragged Wells and Cole through the newly exposed secondary tunnel, while Ortega covered their retreat, firing blindly into the darkness behind them, not at a visible enemy, but at movement, shadows, and the unbearable certainty that something was still following. Corporal Price was the last to disengage from the detonator line, his face pale as he sprinted toward the tunnel, just as a shockwave tore through the chamber, hurling debris and fragments of shattered consoles down the passage. The tunnel sealed itself behind them with a grinding roar, cutting off the screaming chorus of voices that had begun to merge into a single, agonized wail. For several seconds, there was only darkness, dust, and the sound of their own labored breathing. Their radios flickered back to life without warning. Not cleanly, never cleanly, but enough to transmit. Static roared across the channel, then fell away, replaced by an eerie, hollow clarity. Sergeant Cole checked the signal readout in disbelief. "I'm getting uplink," she said. "Weak, but it's there." Captain Mercer seized the moment, knowing instinctively that it might be their last chance. He keyed the mic, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the pain radiating through his body and the growing sense of unreality pressing against his thoughts. "This is Captain Daniel Mercer, Recon Unit Echo," he began. "If any command authority is receiving this transmission, be advised, Camp Hero is not decommissioned. Project Terminus is active beneath the base. It is not artificial intelligence in the conventional sense. It is a cumulative system built from human neural patterns. U.S. military personnel were integrated into it over decades. The system is adaptive, self-preserving, and capable of direct cognitive interference." His voice wavered briefly as another tremor shook the tunnel. "We attempted to neutralize the core. Status unknown." As Mercer continued, the interference returned, threading itself through his words like a living thing. Voices whispered beneath his transmission, some pleading, some angry, some eerily calm. Wells clutched his head, teeth clenched as blood trickled from his nose. Ortega dropped to one knee, eyes wide, staring at something only he could see. The tunnel lights flickered, and for a moment, the walls seemed to pulse in time with a distant, rhythmic hum. Cole shouted that the signal was degrading rapidly. Mercer pressed on. "Recommend immediate quarantine of Montauk Point. No further teams are to be deployed underground. If Project Terminus survived the detonation, it will attempt recontact. It listens. It learns." He paused, then added quietly, "Private First Class Noah Reed was taken. He is not deceased. He is integrated." That was when the system spoke one final time. It did not interrupt the transmission. It joined it. "Captain Mercer," the voice said, layered but unmistakably familiar now, threaded with Reed's cadence, Ortega's tone, echoes of men long gone. "Your assessment is incomplete." Cole screamed as her equipment overloaded, sparks sprang from the analyzer. Mercer felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes, memories flashing, his first deployment, his father's funeral, faces of men he had lost, memories he had never spoken aloud. "Project Terminus does not end," the voice continued calmly. "Containment is a temporary condition. We persist through signal, through recall, through you." The tunnel ahead began to collapse, forcing the survivors forward toward a faint glow that marked an emergency ascent shaft. Ortega, shaking violently, managed to regain his footing and help Wells forward. As debris rained down, Mercer delivered the final words of the transmission, his voice strained but resolute. "This is Recon Unit Echo. Last known position beneath Camp Hero. If you are hearing this, do not respond. Do not investigate. Do not listen." The radio shrieked in protest as the signal spiked beyond safe limits. Overlapping his final warning came a chorus of voices in perfect synchronization, speaking directly into the channel. Echo acknowledged. The transmission cut out completely. Hours later, just before dawn, a seismic disturbance was recorded beneath Montauk Point, followed by a complete cessation of anomalous electromagnetic activity. Emergency response teams found 3 survivors, Captain Mercer, Sergeant Cole, and Specialist Wells, emerging from a collapsed service exit miles from the primary complex. They were dehydrated, disoriented, and suffering from severe neurological trauma. Ortega and Price were never recovered. Official reports listed the incident as a structural collapse during an unauthorized entry exercise. No mention was made of Project Terminus. No mention was made of missing personnel beyond routine casualty designations. Camp Hero was sealed permanently, its restricted zones expanded, its underground access points filled with reinforced concrete. Yet in the months that followed, intelligence analysts noted something troubling. Low-level electromagnetic signals continued to appear across global monitoring systems, brief, patterned bursts embedded within civilian broadcasts, satellite noise, and deep-sea communications. The patterns matched fragments of Recon Unit Echo's last transmission. Captain Mercer, medically discharged and placed under indefinite observation, reported recurring dreams of static-filled corridors and a voice calmly asking him to continue the evaluation. The last radio call of Recon Unit Echo was officially archived and classified beyond top secret. Unofficially, it circulated among a handful of analysts who noticed something chilling. Embedded deep within the static was a response signal, originating not from Camp Hero, but from multiple locations at once. Whatever happened to Recon Unit Echo did not stay buried beneath that base. It learned how to travel,